Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. It's been a while between drinks for us. It's been about a month, but we're back and plenty to discuss. Plenty's gone on since our last podcast. And joining me today, I have Logan,
Good day, everybody.
and I also have Brad.
Hello all.
We might be a lucky charm for the team because the last podcast we recorded was after the win against Southampton, and since then the team hasn't done too well. We haven't recorded a win in the league at least, which we'll talk about first before getting into our cup exploits. But I'll start with you, Logan, and get your thoughts on the results we've had. Just to remind everyone, since the last podcast, we've had a 3-0 loss to Sunderland, 1-1 draw with West Brom, a 1-0 loss to Middlesbrough. A pretty exciting 3-3 draw with Palace, a 3-0 loss to Spurs, a 1-0 loss to West Ham, and a 3-0 loss to Man City. So a pretty disappointing set of results, I guess you would say. But what's your thoughts on them, Logan?
Yeah, certainly. As you mentioned, there's some results in there that really hurt and stung us kind of. Particularly that one against Sunderland at the top of the of that bank of games that you spoke about. Kind of set the tone, I feel, for the predicament that we seem to find ourselves in. To lose in that manner was probably a game that I think we spoke about. It was one that we would have targeted to either win or at the very least draw. And to lose in the fashion that we did, it really just set the precedent. You would suggest that we kind of continued from that and just have looked relatively shaky. And not all the time, but just in patches. We've had some very worrying defensive lapses in crucial moments of the games, and that's kind of been the story of the last month or so. With all but that the Crystal Palace game that you mentioned, which again could probably still be highlighted by a couple of pretty woeful defensive lapses. And yeah, whilst we've looked positive in patches, there's definitely a large reason for concern with the situation we find ourselves in.
Brad, what's your take on that set of results?
Look, pretty much the same. Defensively, we've been pretty rubbish in most cases, and even going back to the Palace game is a game that you think, you know what, if we got 3 points instead of one, we could be talking a little bit differently. But to effectively go from 2-1 down to 3-2 up with 20 minutes to go, you would hope it would hold on, or 15 minutes to go, I think. But that seemed to be 2 points that got away. But probably more recently, at least with the West Ham performance and then the Man City performance for at least an hour, we actually looked like we did in the first few rounds of the season. We actually looked like we were a bit tighter, we were a bit more structured, and maybe defensively that's starting to click together again. Funny enough, it sort of coincides with the fact that Phelan's gone back to a lineup where we're seeing some of these so-called superstars sitting on the bench, and we've gone back to that core group that we started with.
Which I think we talked about in one of the last podcasts, Brad, I think, in terms of switching back to that 3-5-2. And that was something I wanted to touch on, because I think it was after that Middlesbrough game, which was so dour and just so disappointing, that we switched back to that 3-5-2 formation, and we saw immediate benefits against Palace just with the way we played. And as you say, it does coincide as well with Mason dropping to the bench. Diamande, at least initially, was at the top of the formation, and I actually feel he'd be really stiff to have been dropped for Mbakani coming back into the team. But as you say, it was just that core group of players. I mean, Huddleston starting games again and controlling that midfield, and we suddenly looked a bit more assured. We had the three-man defence, which also looked quite good. Logan, do you see the 3-5-2 as the way forward for us, undeniably?
It certainly feels like the most solid formation. I think it also encourages us that when we're in the 3-5-2, we look to kind of be a lot more dangerous in attack as well. Whenever Phelan has opted to play one forward up front, we just have not had the same penetration and looked very lost.
I think the issue for me, and you mentioned that, the issue for me is with the 3-5-2 at the moment at least, with Snodgrass, it's really hard to accommodate him in that 3-5-2 because it seems like we're basically playing him up top off a striker, which means that we basically either play Mbakani or Diamande rather than both. And then as I touched on just before, I mean, Diamande was actually looking quite good, and that goal he scored against Palace was just brilliant. But then he gets dropped for Mbakani, when it would actually be quite good to see both of them up top together.
Yeah, certainly. I couldn't agree more. And it's been quite perplexing that we haven't seen more of the like.
Brad, what's your take on Diamando's place in the team, particularly, and also Mbakani, who, whilst he's looked quite good for us up top, and he holds the play up quite well, and he had that great chance against West Ham, of course, he still hasn't put one away, and you have to wonder whether that's going to start to eat at him a bit.
Look, it probably would from a confidence perspective. You can imagine that he's probably feeling like he's putting a decent shift in when he's on the park, and yet he's not getting that result. And obviously being the first one out when Mbakani's back. I mean, look, we all know that if we go back to those first few games of the season, and obviously we were in a good patch, he was playing a very good role, even wide of the park. And the one thing I think we might actually start to see now in the way Phelan's picking his teams is he's actually picking the right formation based on who the right players are to win a game. And not defend a game. So when we played those 4-4-2s, you know, we all know that Elmo's not really a right back of defensive nature. Teams just attack us. Tottenham tore us apart, you know, down one side of the park there for a lot of the night. We just need some sort of structure around the fact that whether it's 4-4-2 or even 3-5-2, the fact is you've got to have two strikers to score a goal. That's pretty much the bottom line. Snodgrass is great and we love him, but I'd be interested to see how many goals he's actually scored when he started the match as a pure midfielder, even if it is in that sort of so-called number 10 spot. He's been more of a midfielder when he scored these goals and got him behind defences than he has been as an out-and-out striker.
Absolutely, yeah. It seems it's a bit of a puzzle that even though he's our best player, we're kind of struggling to figure out where to play him to get the best out of him. Just as a final note on this set of results, I'll get from each of you probably your pick of the results, which one you thought really kind of stands out, whether or not we actually got points out of it, stands out as our best performance, and then also what was the worst result just in terms of either the way we played or the consequences for the table or however it was. I'll start with you, Brad.
Look, for me, the West Ham one was the one that sort of broke my heart, so to speak, because I felt like we actually were the better side. And not just in one part of the ground. I actually thought from back to front, we actually looked like the better side. We just couldn't do what most lower table sides do is score goals, generally away from home as well. But to be undone by a really rubbish penalty just made me feel sort of gutted for those players. But that seemed to be the time where the team itself looked like it was getting back to that unified approach on the park. Everyone was sticking together and was covering well. We even had at some stages there, Robertson was getting really far forward, and a couple of times he got caught out, but the central defenders really covered him well. I felt like that as a unit, everyone was doing their job perfectly.
And then the worst performance?
Look, I'm actually going to say, although it wasn't actually a bad result per se, I actually thought the Crystal Palace one was a real shocker in that I know there's been other games we've looked terrible. Middlesbrough is one of them, but I felt like in a game where Crystal Palace didn't look like they were even interested until after half-time, where we dominated the play from pretty much the first minute. And then obviously to go, 2-1, I think we were 2-1 down at one stage, and then to get up 3-2 and just, of course, with Fraser Campbell being the super sub that he is, coming on and making sure we got reminded of how good he is. That was the one that got away from us. Those 2 points lost, I think, could be really super valuable. If you look at the table now, those 2 points are really worth something to us.
And how about for you, Logan? What was the best performance and worst performance, or best and worst results out of that group of games?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Brad. Definitely the West Ham game, for me, was one where we probably put in arguably our most positive performance of the season. Just really threatened, and to come away with the result based on the way that we played just didn't seem to do justice. So that was probably the one that stands out. For me, the most disappointing one, although there's been a few of them, again, that Sunderland one, which I mentioned earlier before, that was a real heartbreaker because the fashion that we lost in to a team that we really need to be more than competing with, that's the one that kind of stands out.
Yeah, I mean the Sunderland one for me is definitely a sucker punch because of the fact that we've usually had such a good record against them. So going into that game thinking that at worst I was sort of expecting us to get a point out of it. So to lose 3-0, it's not even a 1-0 or 2-1 loss. It's 3-0 is a pretty convincing loss. It was a pretty heart wrenching performance. For me, I was almost the reverse with the Palace game because the Palace game at least showed that we could score goals and really compete in the game and came back from 2-1 down to take the lead. So that was really good to see, and that sort of seems to have sparked that change in form with us. That since that game against Spurs, against West Ham, and against Man City, we've actually looked okay, even if we haven't got any points out of the games. So, I mean, we'll talk about the Everton game in a little bit, but hopefully soon we can actually start to turn those performances into results. So we'll have to see how that goes. Moving to a slightly more optimistic topic, we did actually get a pretty successful and important win in the Cup halfway through that set of bad results with a penalty win against Newcastle after drawing 1-1 after extra time. I'm assuming both of you watched the game. What were your thoughts watching it in terms of, first of all, Diami scores... first of all, before that, Mbakane gets sent off, then Diami scores. Must be thinking it's pretty much curtains for us at that point. Logan?
Yeah, I definitely thought it was curtains, and just the kind of the nature of that spell where I think Newcastle maybe hit the post twice from memory, or there's a period of that game where they were just peppering us. I couldn't see a way back in, and the fact that it happened so quickly. It was like watching a miracle unfold right before our eyes, to be perfectly honest. So it certainly surprised me.
I mean, it was just incredible. I remember as we kicked off for that, right after that goal, and I thought, oh, jeez, what are we doing? We're passing it back to the defence already. We're going to be sitting back, it's hopeless. And all of a sudden, Dawson's long ball up top, and then Diamande just plays it through, and all of a sudden, we're level. And that footage of the Newcastle fans singing "Que sera, sera," and they can't even finish the verse before we've equalised. It was a pretty surreal moment in the game. What were your thoughts on it, Brad?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I think probably the interesting thing was obviously with Mbakane getting sent off. I thought, oh well, no, that's it. It's going further on in this, we're going to end up in real trouble here. But probably the thing that it showed me, obviously we all know the result and it was great, and Jakupovic was the hero of the day again, saving penalties. But the thing that I loved the most about it is if you actually watch the players' reactions to the win and Jakupovic's last save. Some of the players are obviously excited, but you watch these core guys we've been talking about, Klukas, Diamande, these guys were out of their skin with excitement. And that probably reflects the fact that these guys are so hungry to do well, effectively on the Saturday. So probably for me, it actually highlighted who the real, hard workers are. When things are really, down low, who are the guys that really want to step up and have a real crack? And obviously probably the thing that took out of the night was I don't think we were that great. I think we had some patches as Newcastle did, and probably as far as standings go, us and Newcastle are probably pretty similar. You could argue maybe the fact they've got some league form that they're better than us at the moment, but the fact was that these guys really did dig in when they had no chance, and it was good to see for a change.
And just on that, is it frustrating to you guys when you see players like Diamande, like Jakupovic, like Myler perhaps, some of those guys might have great games in the Cup and they have that excitement and that winning factor and they've got that momentum going, to then not get picked in the league? Is there some sort of frustration from you guys? I know personally I get very frustrated about Jakupovic, and that's a whole other topic we might talk about a bit later, but some of those guys who don't seem to get that consistent look in, especially after doing well in the Cup.
It is for me, because I don't think they all should just get a spot based on what we know they can do in the past, but clearly we've seen at times, Mason just seems to be not really the player that we all thought he was going to be, and then you're sitting there saying, okay, if we've got our backs against the wall for a period of play here, surely someone like Myler is going to do a better job. at that specific stage. But probably the only thing I would say is that the team morale side of things is obviously got to be key. If we're going to grind out, another 25 points or whatever it is that we need to actually get through this, there's going to be times where you need your squad to actually stand up and individuals to add something to what's going on. And leaving a lot of them out of the play when we have been so bad is probably not going to help that morale.
What are your thoughts on it, Logan?
Yeah, certainly. There's a large frustration in the squad selection when you do see those positive performances in the cup, and players like Myler that you've mentioned before. He's somewhat obviously you know what you're going to get with David Myler, and he will sort of work himself into the ground. Arguably, it will. Or we know that it will come with mistakes to a degree, and he will probably turn the ball over slightly more than some of your higher quality midfielders, so to speak. But if we go back to the start of the season and we look at the results that we pulled out with our core team, I would like to see Phelan backing those kind of the mainstays and really putting pressure on guys like Ryan Mason. Despite the price tag, he should be forcing his way into the squad when he comes off the bench, and when he's given his opportunities, he shouldn't really be given that kind of free pass, knowing that the guys that are the core of the team have, for the last, probably 4 seasons, really, galvanised everything that's good about Hull City in a relatively sad time.
And I wonder, to some extent, with Phelan, because he's made these signings, he signed Mason for, 13 million, he signed Marshall for 5 million, he signed Henriksen, signed some of those guys, that there might be that pressure on him to actually play them to justify those price tags and justify that money spent. Particularly, I feel, with Marshall, for instance, who's barely been challenged. I know there was that one spell right after the Southampton game, I think it might have been, where Phelan came out and admitted how close he was to dropping Marshall. And I feel like that's a very easy thing to admit to when you've just had a good result and you can sort of say, I was quite close to dropping him, but I stuck with him and he's pulled through, and look at how great we've performed. But we've now had another 6 or 7 games where we haven't got the results. We've conceded a large number of goals, as we've been doing all season. It kind of gets to that point where you think, well, hang on, maybe it is time to make a change. Maybe it is time to put him under a bit of pressure, because particularly in this game against Newcastle, it underlined again that Jakupovic in goal is a brilliant penalty saver. We've faced something like 9 penalties in the league this season, which is a ridiculously high number considering we've only played, I think, 17 or 18 games, 19 maybe. It's almost 1 every 2 games. And we've only saved 1 in the league, and that was from Jakupovic. We've saved a fair few in the Cups through Jakupovic. Perhaps Marshall needs to be put under a bit of pressure for his spot.
I agree, and you could probably look at it with an even wider lens on this. You go back to the years we've been relegated from the Premier League before. I call it manager interference, and that is when you've got a squad that's actually grinding out average results, and then you go and spend big bucks on a Bullard or other players that come in that not only then have a price tag they have to live up to, they're going to do it in an environment that they're not used to. They all come generally from bigger and stronger clubs. And so obviously there's this whole point of you're changing what's working to some extent for the sake of just buying players because you need them. Now, we all know we needed players at the start of the season. I'm not about to dispute that. But, Mason has come with a really heavy price tag, and so far he's worth nowhere near that. But what happens then is Phelan's obviously rating him as a much better player than what we've already got. So by design, he's always going to pick him to some extent. So the problem is, of course, you get a run like we've had of 5 or 6 bad games, and the season now feels like it's away from us.
What are your thoughts on it, Logan?
Yeah, I'm all for the grafters, particularly at this stage. I think that, like Brad said, I also go back to the time when we signed Ben Arthur, and we went on. There was we signed 4 people in quick succession, and everyone kind of had their thoughts of who was going to be the star performer. And Diami, who was probably a little bit overlooked in the sense that he only came with I think it was a £3.5 million price tag, kind of seemed to be the pick of the bunch, and really stood out. And I think that kind of what Brad's talking about is there's players that you're were quite often very easy to go past because there are the bigger names. But when you put enough big names in a different environment, particularly in a relegation scrap, you're not always guaranteed those results. And I think that Ryan Mason's the classic example for that at the moment for us. In Tottenham, he was given that kind of license to roam and was free flowing, and he could afford that luxury at Spurs. But with basically the relegation scrap, where we seem to have a lot more traffic, he just doesn't seem to be providing what we need as far as the criteria for Hull City at the moment.
The important bit to add to that is exactly what Logan said there is you're getting guys from bigger clubs who aren't used to being in a dogfight every week. And I point to Mbakani as an example. We've seen he can perform in a relegated side or thereabouts. We should actually be looking at those sorts of players that can perform in a Hull City 11, not even a Man United reserves 11 to some extent. You want them to actually see they can do it in the tough conditions against good sides, and I think that just adds some weight to what Logan's saying.
And we should touch on the actual outcome of the Cup game as well, where we've drawn United in the semi-finals, the other semi-finals between Liverpool and Southampton. So we couldn't really have done a whole lot better than United. I mean, arguably Southampton would have been slightly easier, but the way they're playing, the way United are playing, it's hard to say at any point in time which would have been a better outcome. But what are your guys' thoughts on playing United in the semi-final?
I think it's a very good thing. I think that it gives us a kind of a bright spark in a rather dull period at the moment, particularly when there was the debate kind of how serious do we take the Cup, and all of a sudden we find ourselves with a trip to Old Trafford, and the potential of, I know, not getting too far ahead of ourselves, a potential of some silverware, which when you're sitting 20th in the Premier League at Christmas time, certainly is something positive in a rather dull period. So look, I'm looking forward to the trip. I think it's in somewhat it's a bit of a free hit. Nobody really expects us to get up over United, but it's a little bit of excitement for the faithful fans at the moment who are still going to the games. And hey, let's have a crack at them and see what happens.
And look, I echo that exactly. I think probably the only good thing is that obviously every week in the Premier League there's pressure to get a point or two or three, or a point or three I should say, not two. That'd be interesting. But at least in this case, the last I saw on the betting or something, we're at sort of $13 to $15 somewhere around there. So no one's giving us a chance in hell of getting a result. I think even the draw was $6 or $7. So there is literally no pressure. We might actually be able to see some guys really, try and take it on. Obviously, we're up against a team that's going to take it just as seriously as we are. But you're always at that tight time of the year as well. I mean, we've got Swansea a couple of days before. We're going to play 3 games in 8 days or 7 days, whatever it is, as is Man United. So we won't see them put a weakened side out, but they're probably going to have to manage their players even more so than we are.
Perhaps even Ibrahim might not be able to cope with a couple of games in a few days. So I guess depending on how seriously they need to take their league games, it might depend on whether or not he starts in the Cup, which could make it a bit more manageable for us.
Yeah, look, I think we actually played one of our best defensive games of the season against Man U. I think it was round 2 or 3. So I think that we know that we can probably defend for long periods of time against them. It's the fact of whether we can actually do some damage at the other end to give us more breathing space over 2 legs.
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be interesting to see how that one pans out. And that's first leg mid-January, I think, and the second leg towards the end of January. And then if we make it through, the final will be early February. So it's a couple of exciting games to look forward to in January. But before we get there, we've got one final game for 2016, December 31st, our time, against Everton. It's a good way to start New Year's Eve, 7 a.m. our time, over here in Sydney. I'll start with you, Logan. Everton have had a bit of an up and down season so far. I mean, they started quite well and then went through a pretty lean patch. What are your thoughts on them going into the game, and what sort of result could you expect for us to get from them?
Yeah, they're certainly an interesting one. As you touched on, they're a bit all over the place as far as they will pull a result out of a hat and then really disappoint you in some respects. So I think it's certainly a game that's there for the picking. Against City, which we haven't really spoken about for 70 minutes, I thought we were quite impressive. And I think anything of that kind of degree will put us in a position to at least take points from the game. So, look, optimistically, I'd love to see the 3 points, but I'm actually tipping the draw.
How about you, Brad?
I've always had this sort of thing about Everton being a bit of a bogey team. Even when we first played them, we always seemed to play okay against them, but then they, had an Arteta free kick or something that made us think that we're really not where we think we are in the Premier League. But I actually think we're a real chance to snatch this one as well. And I actually think that the confidence we've been showing is not fake. We've had, 2 really good league games where, okay, both times not on the right result, but as a manager of those players, you wouldn't be upset with the effort or the fact that you think we are the bottom side in the league. I think we've shown really good unity in the last few weeks, and you've got a Friday night game against Everton in circumstances that there's probably just as much pressure on them to beat us as we're the bottom side, and I think we're a real chance if we can come with even an hour's play like we did against Man City. We should be able to beat Everton, yeah.
And then I'll start with you, Logan, but is there any changes to the 11 that you would make from last time out against City? Or as we're sort of saying, we've been playing into good form now, perhaps, this is the team that will finally click and get a result?
Look, I'm still not convinced by Marshall that if I was to be making a selection, I'd be bringing in Jakubovic just to kind of stick with that the idea of the grafters and the core group. Jakubovic has obviously been there a lot longer, so I would make the goalkeeper change, and I certainly wouldn't be looking to bring Mason and whoever else at the same time. That the changes for me against City were just didn't seem to make much sense. So I'd stick with the same 11, well, with the keeping change, obviously.
Brad?
Yeah, look, I think probably, without diving into the keeper option, I think we've shown enough in the last 2 games that we've got the formula, the starting 11 right, and unfortunately Phelan tinkered with it in the last game, and that's where we fell apart. So I'd be leaving the same starting 11 on, and barring injury or genuine fatigue, I'd be leaving that formation on as much as I possibly could.
Fair enough. And then just looking ahead, because it's sort of the last podcast for the year, what are your expectations for 2017? I mean, we're bottom of the table at Christmas time, which generally spells relegation. There's obviously a lot of off-field issues as well. Logan, I'll start with you. Obviously, we've extended player contracts by a year for a number of players: Snodgrass, Livermore, Dawson, Hernandez, Maguire, and Robertson, I believe, is the 6. Do you see those players sticking around throughout the remainder of the season, or maybe selling some of them in January to raise funds? What do you see for the start of 2017?
Look, I'd be very surprised to see anyone outgoing, just given the circumstances. We're relatively light on players as is. In saying that, obviously. The crystal ball isn't working at the moment as far as the sale of the club, so we can't really even hazard a guess onto that one. But look, I think one thing that is worth remembering is, whilst without trying to be too doom and gloom at Christmas time, there's still plenty more games to play yet. If we were to go down, based on the fact that the sale of the club would then be quite likely, and we do seem to have some very decent assets to our name with Hernandez, Mason, players that will prove quite a price tag. It's not the be-all and end-all. But look, I think if we were to win against Everton, I think it could be a very different-looking January. A couple of good results, and particularly performance against United in the Cup. And you just sort of never know. Momentum's a funny thing, as we saw with Leicester last season.
And then Brad, obviously Phelan's talked about trying to get deals done early in January, but also at the same time has said he still has to talk to the owners about funds available. How do you see 2017 panning out?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of a worry, isn't it, when he's saying that he's got to talk to the owners, and we're pretty much in January in a couple of days. But I think probably, look, if you go by gut feel, I think Hernandez is gone. And I think Bruce is the biggest fan of him in the world. Bruce would be thinking, do you know what, if I can get him across, I'm pretty much going to be guaranteeing myself a top 2 or top 3 spot. And the owners would love to see the amount of money they could possibly get for him come in the coffers. But I'd probably say at the moment the most encouraging thing has been the fact that all those players have re-signed or are on the verge of re-signing, because it takes another negative point out of this long drawn-out saga where some of these players in recent weeks might not have even thought they'd be here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Whereas now they're saying, well, unless someone comes from a big offer, I am staying put. And I think that might help with just the resolve that we're seeing, and hopefully we see it going forward. But certainly on the New Year front, we've pretty much got to win one of the next 2 or 3 games to have any chance. And looking at the draw about a week ago, I think I looked at the fixtures, and right up to about Middlesbrough, we've got probably one of the easier runs up until the end of January. I think we've got Chelsea at the end of January. So I think we've got 4, if we're on song, we've got 4 possible games we could get a result in. Whereas a lot of those bottom 5 or 6 clubs haven't got as easy a run as that. So we just be hoping that we can pick up 1 or 2 of these wins that we need to get us up around the fact that we might be able to escape.
Certainly, and hopefully we can start that with a good win against Everton tomorrow morning our time, and kickstart 2017 in style. So thank you so much for coming on, Logan.
Not a problem.
And also Brad.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you everyone for listening in. I know it's been about a month since our last podcast, so thanks for everyone staying patient while we settled our equipment and got sorted after I moved homes and had to sort out internet and all that sort of thing. But thank you everyone for tuning in, and until next time, come on City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
City's on fire. We're going higher and higher. There's no turning back 'cause you're out.